you. So, good evening. It's great that we have so many people here. There are a few more chairs here if you want to grab. I think there's even some outside if you want to grab the chairs so that you're a bit more comfortable. So my name is Martin Hilleman, together with Mohammed and Alan. We're trying to organize these meetings, these local links. And what we're trying to do is we're trying to have roughly once a month. So we didn't have one that's the first, in January, so this is the first one this year. We're going to try and have these meetings. And the idea is that get people together who are not necessarily in academia, but in industry or non-traditional fields, physics background. And what we would like to do is we learn a little bit, just meet each other, see what are the new fields is, and also some of the career paths to kind of try to figure out what different people did, and and hopefully in the way also pick up some interesting physics. So tonight I'm very happy to have Scott Axelrod here. I've known Scott for, 20 years?
Yeah, just about.
Yeah, so as you'll learn, Scott has a very wide career. So he started in mathematical physics, and then went to academia, and then went to industry, to oil industry, and then to speech recognition, and then now finance. And so he could really has a very broad things, and I think it would be very interesting to hear about everything, and the theory behind it. Thank you, Scott.
Thanks. So first, is everybody comfortable? You offered that if you wanted to get chairs. I think there's a couple of more chairs right there. If you're
I like to keep the beer with it.
Or you can sit by the beer. In fact, I recommend that maybe this is the kind of talk everybody should have a lot of beer. It'll go over better. So thanks, Martin, for the introduction. So I guess you mentioned that there's all sorts of talks here, and as Martin mentioned, I understood, and I guess this is more of a career path talk. So I really, as Martin said, I've gone and done several different things, so I'm going to just try to give you a broad overview of the path I've traveled. And I'll frame it as confessions. I'm going to say places where, gee, maybe I wish I had known this or that, or done better. And also, I don't call myself a physicist, I call myself a mathematician, even though I started in mathematical physics. And I have a theoretical bent. That's another theme of the talk, is I'm always looking for a big, broad theory to understand things. So initially, I sort of had an academic focus. I, just worked on jobs for network computers before the internet existed. Those were just kind of jobs, but my passion was understanding how geometry and quantum field theory interacted. So I'll go over some of that. And then, as Martin mentioned, that's where I met Martin. I worked at Schlumberger, which used to be in Connecticut, is now their research center is down the road here. Anyway, so I worked on NMR and porous media in industry as I was orbiting out of academia, and then I went on to work on human language technologies at IBM, speech recognition and dialogue systems, and then I took a job in finance at a hedge fund, but not a quantitative hedge fund. It's what you would call a global macro hedge fund. So they think about the world and make decisions, and I'm kind of a token quant there. It's like, let's understand some things analytically. And I even kind of wrote a book that's kind of off the deep end. In fact, it's called Off the Deep End. I won't go into that. And so what I am working now, I'm still at the hedge fund, but we've sort of taken a turn. Sorry, the screensaver seems to go off. So recent work, I'll hopefully have time to go over a little bit at the end. Talk about statistics of democracy indicators and how they relate to market returns. That's sort of current work. Again, I'm calling this theories about everything, but this is really talking about my life path, thinking about theories, but I'm not going to have time to go into the details of them. But I'm hoping to prep conversation to talk about anything you like after the talk, or you can interrupt me at any time. So since I said I'm into theories. I guess my theory of the talk, I'm trying to find a framing for this talk, which I finally came to at the end, just this vague general statement. We're all shaped by our characters, our past experiences, and our future opportunities. So this is kind of something how my character has shaped me in my past experiences and some opportunity that I'm interested in pursuing now. But really, I'm actually, I know a lot of you are young and just getting started out and really worried about your own career paths and looking for practical advice, which I may not be able to give because frankly, most of the jobs I got were lucky. I just followed the path. I didn't have to send out hundreds of applications. There was kind of a connection. And I'll mention what some of those connections were. But anyway, now I'm thinking about my own career, where I'm going to go. Do I keep following on past interests that I can't ever seem to get out of my mind, still thinking about fundamental physics and even off the deep end sort of stuff? Or do I just focus on a future opportunity like connecting? In fact, I would have had a meeting today with them, but I'm giving this talk, so next week. Connecting with this huge financial service provider on socially responsible investing. They're setting up a platform. Maybe we'll work with them. Also, a theme is the question of how to focus. So when you're thinking about what career you're going to go into, it's pretty hard ahead of time, especially if you don't really have a lot of options and you just have to take whatever job they give you. But it's hard to think about, gee, is the working style here going to work for me? What do the people like? I'll talk about, sometimes I worked in a room alone. That's when you kind of get to your deepest stuff. And sometimes in a small team, which I think of as the times I've been most productive in actually getting stuff out. Or do I want to interact with the big world somehow, which is good for dreaming, but I don't really know how to do it. So anyway, so that's kind of the framework. So now I'm going to just go through each of my stages in a bunch of slides pretty quickly. And then I'll mention, some not even very technical results. I mean, in finance, things are really simple compared to this super duper physics. So it'll be really some simple stuff at the end, but pretty useful for society, as I have time. So I'm actually going to start talking about high school. So this gives you an idea of how old I am. I'm fairly far in a career, but basically I started out, just books and underpowered computer from Radio Shack computer stores. That was a place to connect up to stuff. I was self-motivated. I bought this stuff with my paper route money, and I did some interesting work in a room alone. And luckily enough, then this is when I said about the connections. Well, I got my first job in high school working at a startup in computer software, because I was referred to it by the manager at the Radio Shack where I bought all that stuff. And actually, my brother was also working at that Radio Shack. What the startup did was, this was before the internet. They said, okay, let's have a central computer talk to lots of different things out there, like to read water meters or to run terminals. This was even before America Online. It was kind of nascent stuff. This company was bought out by cable TV, and I did some sort of warm-up projects to prove my worth for them, like the company payroll program and stuff. And finally, then I worked on their main thing, optimized machine language code for high-speed communications. The very low-level stuff. So I would say the working style of this startup was, there were well-defined tasks, and I was a team member, just a high school student. I didn't have to think about the whole structure, just did what I was told, but had some autonomy. So my confession, a character trait confession, if you like, is, I just had a technical focus, and I was clueless about life issues and what this meant. Although I didn't know my focus was I wanted to go into physics. So as an undergraduate, I was lucky again, that same Radio Shack manager referred me to another job in software. That was, in a sense, another pre-internet kind of company. That what this company did was, it from the central computer in the office, it controlled these boxes that talk to heating, ventilation, and air conditioning units in school systems. And the guy was a nuclear engineer. He wrote a spreadsheet that would decide when is the most efficient time to turn on the furnaces, etc. And they said, okay, we'll save you money and we'll get a cut of the money we save you. And I wrote the software which allowed the operators in the main office to enter the programs and send them out to the remote computers. Just for time, unless anybody asks, I'm going to gloss over some of this stuff here because we'll run out of. I wanted you to get just drunk enough, but not too drunk. But the working style here is basically I worked in a room alone, literally in the middle of the night. I would come in at the end of the day at 5 p.m. and talk to the president of the company for a few minutes about where he wanted to go, and then I would just design and build the software. and again, this was like just a job. My real interest was math and physics, because really I wanted to understand physics. When I studied differential geometry, I even got to the point of studying string theory as an undergraduate, and all the philosophy I thought was relevant to physics. And the style here, I would say, is I just studied in a room alone. I mean, I went to my classes and I had close friends, but I didn't really have anybody advising me, except for one math teacher who kind of picked me out and gave me an independent study, and I think that had a big influence on why I went into math. So here's my confessions. I'm always dreaming of an ultimate theory. That's why I kind of gravitated to even getting into string theory as an undergraduate. And I had, so it's a deep but narrow focus. Like, I'm really into this thing, but I don't really know about life in the world and all that stuff. And I was pretty underconfident. So in Princeton graduate school, they had this stupid rule. You couldn't apply to both math and physics, which is what I did everywhere else. They said you could only apply to one. And in my junior year in college, I had done all my graduate work in math, and I was only taking the graduate courses in physics in my senior year. So I said, oh, I'm not sure. I better just apply to math. So this was a clueless decision about, my passion was really physics, but I just, kind of was a little nervous, and I went in it through math. So next I went to graduate school, sort of a path of least resistance, and I was able to still work with the physicist Edward Witten, who some of you know as the best physicist, the god of string theory. Anyway, so during my phase, he keeps revolutionizing string theory, at least, all the time. So the revolution that he did when I was there was he invented topological quantum field theories. If some of you kind of have come across those. But basically they're a way to understand the interaction of geometry and quantum field theory. They're really heavy-duty math, but at least it's a little more tractable math that you might be able to make rigorous as opposed to string theory in general. It was one of the heydays of Renaissance where there was a connection between mathematicians and physicists. And that's why some of this work led Witten to a Fields Medal, which is the highest medal at the time for mathematics, where he solved something called 3D Chern-Simons gauge theory. Keep track of the name Simons right here. Anyway, so I understood some stuff as a grad student, like what was later called cohomological field theory. What was the structure of those? This is an example of things I tried to work on. They helped me catch error in Witten's papers. He even sent my notes on this to kind of the philosophical godfather of topological quantum field theory, the great mathematician Michael Atiyah. But so a confession is, I waited for him to tell me to write it up and publish it. I mean, I had these notes and they were sent out, but he never told me to do that. And then another confession that was stupid is I turned down his offer to put my name on the paper when he later wrote it up. And it's a complicated story as to why I did that, and it didn't include, as many of his papers don't, all of the details that I had in this write-up. And anyway, that's a long story. If anyone asks, I can come back to it. But graduate school part 2, I did have success. I got a nice thesis, and I'll just say the technique that I use, I kind of developed this. I started with formal infinite dimensional manipulations of the functional integral. Hopefully most of you have some idea what that is. Anyway, it's infinite dimensional integrals that help you do quantum field theory, if hopefully most of you know what that is.
And it has nothing to do with HVAC, correct?
And it has nothing to do with HVAC. And anyway, so you start with these formal infinite dimensional manipulations, and you get down to something you can do rigorous in finite dimensions. But what happens in this kind of thing in physics generally is called anomalies, or things that ought to go through, but somehow when you get rid of all that infinite dimensional stuff, there's a little intricate geometry to handle artifacts that seem to break symmetries that ought to be there. And there's a whole theory of anomalies in geometry to handle that I use. I also developed a theory of generalized Lagrangian field theories and generalized inverse theorems, and all this geometry that was building up to a bigger picture. But we'll come back to this key phrase, generalized Lagrangian field theories. But again, mostly I worked in a room alone. Maybe that's what most physicists do when they are doing development. But as I said before, when I was productive, I got the papers out when my advisor and a collaborator wanted to get the results out. So we were focused and got it out. So the confession, maybe this is the same confession that a lot of people can say about graduate school, that they left sort of shell-shocked. I'll be more specific. I was sort of shell-shocked by Witten at that time as a student. Yeah, I guess having the technical focus but not the life wisdom, if you like, set me back. So here's some of these quotes that I had a whole bunch more of them, but they didn't. Some of the quotes that kind of rolled around through my mind afterwards. And he actually told me, "You're one of my best students, but least practical." It's pretty insightful. And he'd ask, "Why do you want to waste your time working on foundational stuff?" Which, when I say I'm in theory, well, that's what I am. But it was a little bit curious because, well, isn't string theory supposed to be foundational? But I didn't have the wherewithal to actually respond to him. I mean, these were questions, but I was just shell-shocked, and I didn't just engage with the conversation. Well, the reason I want to work on it, blah, 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 blah. I just run away. So he used to say you need to learn to write things up in the background. But I'd say that was the plague of my academic career. I couldn't get things written up. But actually, it was pretty hard to write as a mathematician. It's not the same as a physicist getting out some broad visionary paper, or Witten, who's an exception to everything, who can write 100 pages of technical stuff overnight. That might be an exaggeration, but only a little bit. But I really needed to learn to write mathematics and that sort of thing. But I couldn't do it in the background. But he did say, though, I need to learn to write in the background. Also said you should be a leader in the field, but I didn't have the confidence or wherewithal to try to become one.
Excuse me, question.
Yeah.
Was Edward Witten your advisor?
He was my advisor in graduate school. I keep talking. Yeah.
Do you blame him also a little bit for not showing you how to write things up in the background automatically?
Well, I never blamed Witten because I said, Witten has a pretty tough task being Witten. He was, he was generous with his time with me, and he's always incredibly efficient. So he boiled things down to just telling me these single sentences, which were insightful. But what I really felt I missed out was there wasn't anybody else to talk to. I was in the graduate math department at Princeton, and some of them would say, "Well, I don't want to waste my time cleaning up physicists' dirty work." So it's like, well, I want to kind of make progress in rigorous mathematics because I was in the math department. That's what that affects your path, the choice to doing that. So I wanted to understand things more rigorously, and but I also wanted to make progress in the physics itself. So I just didn't want to clean up the dirty work, but clean it up in a nice, tidy way.
Because I feel like this being a great physicist is something, but being a great mentor is something else.
Two different things.
A lot of times, the physics professors, at least, have been in physics for that doesn't happen at the same time, and they just expect you to look at them and see how great they are. You become great.
I think that's a great point, and that's exactly, it's a good summary. And it's supposed to look and well, or they just presume that you are great. That's why you're working with them. You know, there was a big kerfluffle about mathematical physicists. There was a discussion some point in high-level writings. Quinn and Jaffe, if you know the names, so Jaffe's local office headed it. Actually, he funded me at some point when I was at Harvard. He basically said, well, if we're doing mathematics, we should at least have truth in labeling. This is rigorous, this is just conjecture, etc. And Atiyah, who I just mentioned, who is kind of the godfather of the field, wrote back and said, well, we're all adults here, we can just work. But I used to think, well, I'm not an adult. I feel like I'm a child abused child, and you know, I actually would want some of that truth in labeling to sort things out. So anyway, hang on. So anyway, you know, it was natural for me to follow the path of least resistance. I mean, I was doing good work in this, you know, hot topic in mathematical physics. I was a Harvard and MIT postdoc and an MIT professor for some years, and I got some nice results on rigorous Chern-Simons perturbation theory by kind of following. I used this blue code of his for like, this is how my connection worked, or you know, practicalities. This green code is, well, what skills were useful? Like the skills I learned as a graduate student to push down this stuff from infinite dimensions to finite dimensions and handle this complicated geometry. I sort of did that again. And then I got into this project. I generalized this vastly to doing perturbation theory around what's called an instanton moduli space, not an isolated local solution, but a whole family of solutions of the classical equations of motion. And it was really some intense geometry converted into a lot of mathematical symbols. And here's a high-level summary in some long manuscript that I wrote and never published, which is the kind of bane of my career. It's a tradition in mathematics to sit on things and take a while to get them out, but not in physics. So it was this difference of cultures and falling the rut between them was quite hard. So part two of academia got worse. I kind of got into this Uber program of trying to think about this in even more generality and how to do it on manifolds with boundaries. And I thought of that as a warm-up for understanding something called Chern-Simons stream field theory, which is sort of supposed to be it was actually a Witten's approach to trying to understand what string theory is really about. And I want to understand the geometry of that. But my confession is the whole time my mind got overloaded with unpublished pieces of big stories. And you know, I gave lots of talks, but then the papers I didn't get out, and I didn't find collaborators and people to talk to. I mean, people would hear Witten's doing that they want to hear these talks, but nobody wanted to really delve into the details so much. So this is confessions. My failure, I didn't break the problem up into small, accessible pieces and say, you know, it was like this grand thing that ties it all together instead of, here's a little snippet of a result, here's a snippet of a result. I didn't draw others into the program. I didn't really know how to do that. And I didn't make a major advance. I couldn't be a mini Witten and just, you know, every month come out with a revolution in the field. You know, it takes years to develop things. And I was also distracted by health problems and worldly problems, which unfortunately you can read about in the book if you want. And specifically the two-body problem. By two-body problem, maybe some of you know the term, if you're married and you want to get a job in the same town as your wife, she was also a struggling physicist and trying to find a job. So I kind of orbited out of academia, and where my first stop on the orbit was I was a consultant at Schlumberger in 1997. That's when I met Martin, and that's when my wife took a job in the group. And I collaborated with Pavitra Sen, who kind of drew me in actually when I was hiding in the hotel room, and it was like, I can't deal with it. And he said, no, he should come in. And by the end of meeting him, I started, actually before Denise, my wife, started, I hung out in the summer, I rented a room, and just started collaborating.
Where was it?
They were in Connecticut, Ridgefield,
Okay.
Connecticut at the time, but now they're right down the street, so they moved up here. So, so we worked on NMR. So this is kind of, I'm talking about theories of everything. So I don't have time to get into the details of this, but what I would say is it was real physics, and it was practical real physics, which was nice. Working in industry on practical real physics, even if it was just for a semester or a year to getting the papers out. But anyway, I did do the skills connection is some of this fancy academic geometric perturbation theory that I did as a professor. Actually, it turned out to be useful to have a real practical application here. And it was more working as a physicist, I would say. Somebody else had told me advice they got from their advisor in physics that seemed much more relevant to doing physics, which is, well, you should focus on the relevant parameters. That's pretty good advice. So that's what we did. And also, it was, again, big picture, trying to put together this big theory, but at least not starting from scratch, because Computer, the whole group, Martin had already been working on sorts of things, so I just put together one version of a big picture to tie together the different extreme regimes as length scales varied using these geometric techniques. And my confession here is, even though it was exciting to be doing real physics, it was too late for me. I was already orbiting out of just focusing on physics. I was losing my tight technical focus. Although I did go on to work in a new technical area at the IBM speech group that I mentioned before. And there's an interesting story here. How did it come about? I was actually offered a job at Renaissance Technology, which is the premier, if you've heard about anything, it's the premier quant fund in the world. They just print money hand over fist all the time. And it was started by Jim Simons, whose name happened to be on all of my papers, Jim Simons, that work that he did as a mathematician. In fact, there's some article about him that mentions, at his birthday conference, there was even this obscure talk, this is the world he comes from, called Generalized Chern-Simons Theory and Invariance. Chern-Simons invariance is a generalized Lagrangian equilibrium. That was my talk. Anyway, so I used it, my collaborator, I didn't realize it, my collaborator, in addition to Witten, when I was a grad student, he actually was working on leave from IBM, the Human Language Technologies group at IBM. And so there was a lot of people that flowed from that group because they do a lot of probabilistic modeling, and they had some smart physicists there originally, that Renaissance just basically hired them all out. And I think I'm the only counterexample of somebody who flowed in the other direction. I used my collaborator who went on from IBM to Renaissance to write me a recommendation to work at IBM. So I went directly away from money purposely, but it solved the two-body problem. So I could work there, and basically my wife and I could at least live together. And at IBM, I think, although I was miserable a lot of the time because basically still shell-shocked and morning-leaving physics and other grand dreams, it was a very productive time for me because it was like a team that you're working on, and it was easy to write papers. I used to call them popcorn papers. You could just write them and get them out. 4-page conference papers, get a bunch of them out, then write a big journal article on the big theory. So the skills that were useful, some of this probabilistic modeling stuff is useful if you've been doing field theory and string theory and statistical mechanics. So there were maximum entropy models and a general class of Todd-Gaussian mixture models. And it was nice to actually be doing a kind of experimental work. It was computational experiments. You had data in your hand. Which, by the way, I guess I'm not really giving you useful job tips, but that's what industry wants, is people who can actually do stuff with data in hand. So my confessions were, as I just mentioned, I knew it was just a temporary phase. My heart wasn't in this new big goal. I didn't want to, some of the people in the group saw speech recognition as a key to a grand goal of artificial intelligence, but that wasn't kind of where my heart was. So ironically, I went on to Falcon Management, which I've been there since 2004. That's this small hedge fund that I've been at as a director of research, fancy title you didn't click on. The link here was recommended by a friend in mathematical physics. Again, that's not that useful of a job trip, but I think it's also an indication of the world has changed a little bit. I don't know that, I'm sorry to say, things fall in people's laps so easily now because you all have to deal with hundreds of applicants all the time. But it was a little small fund, and he hired me because I was a tech guy, but with broad interests in other things that I took advantage of some free time when at IBM to develop my interests. And I was interested in, not so much in AI per se, but just in probabilistic modeling and so forth. And some of the finance and economics papers looked like they were doing some interesting stuff. So we did, I had a good time there, or have had. We taught courses together, and I did all sorts of modeling, low-level modeling, not high-level like Renaissance, but more to help my manager, who's a global macro trader, which means he just trade everything based on insight around the world. Somebody like George Soros. So my working style, basically, I worked with my manager and with people who came from the banks with models, but I didn't really have a team of peers. So it wasn't productive in the sense I didn't get any papers out at the time. That wasn't the point. Although most finance places are incredibly secretive. I took this job because he wasn't super secretive, but on the other hand, he didn't really care about publishing. And I never found the money printing press, so I can't tell you how to print money. I'm sorry. It's hard. Basically, you come up with models and they backtest well and they perform okay for a little bit, and then everybody else starts doing them and it goes away. And Renaissance takes all the money because they're basically looking at the car under the hood in fine detail. Anyway, so all right, I'll take this final turn here. Let's see how we're doing on time. Well, I've gone a little over already. So let me just, can I take a few more minutes? So finance has changed a lot since the market crashed in 2008. And my manager also got a divorce at that time, and Falcon changed a bunch. And basically, we've been kind of puttering along, doing all right, but we're sort of redirecting now, or possibly. The president manager of my fund also has charitable interests, and he's funded this Leitner Law Center at Fordham University, and they run courses on corporate social responsibility and investing, leadership training courses, and we did some work related to that as a warm-up, and then basically here is, he asked me to look at something and say, oh, how does this index, this new gender equality index, can we do something with that? And I said, I looked and I said, this is part of a large database of democracy indicators. So it doesn't make sense to just look at one indicator and see what it does. It's like, okay, I'll look at it and say, it does something, well, so what? So, you have to see it in context. So I looked at all the indicators, and actually I was stunned to see a robust result that social improvements, meaning improvements in these indicators, are very robustly correlated positively with future improvements in markets. Meaning, you have these indicators for each country separately and over time. And we presented this at the UN Global Compact, which was a connection because of this leadership training course. Somebody who had spoken it came from the UN Global Compact, and they actually asked me to write something up. So nobody ever asked me to write something up. They said, write it up. So just half a year later, I did a thorough statistical analysis of the initial basic result, and I wrote it up, but I published it as a working paper. I still have to figure out how to publish it academically or what direction to go. I'm still clueless. Anyway, so I'm just going to close with the only thing of content here is just to tell you a little bit about the results of that paper really quickly. So we basically, I already told you that we looked at the correlation of past changes of democracy indicators with future changes of stock markets by, it's tagged by year and country. So we got, it's a lot of work putting together the data properly and stuff. Put together a database of data going back for 17 countries going back to 1900, and data for a broader set of countries from 1960. And then I looked at all this VDEM data, some of which goes back to 1900 and covers a huge number of countries, and I filtered it down to 169 indicators for which we had enough data to do a proper statistical test. I said, okay, let's look at it in these 4 different ways. And here's the punchline. This is the result, essentially, as we presented the UN Compact, Global Compact before. By the way, the UN Global Compact their mission is to try to get people to kind of follow these SDG goals, the Sustainable Development Goals. They're trying to give guidance and get companies and countries interested in following good policies. So they're happy to have this to say, yeah, it works. So the first result for 144 of the indicators that measured good things, and I'll give some examples, the correlation was positive. And for 13 out of 14 that measured bad things, the correlation was negative. That's like kind of a stunning result. If these were independent coin flips, this would be like technically 1 in a gazillion chance. I won't bother with the rest. But of course, they're not all independent coin flips. So the high-level coin flips are somewhat independent, and it also works for these. Like the political empowerment, this is the first thing that we started. I said, take a look at this one, and that has a positive mean correlation. That's average over blah, 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 all the studies and all the data. But then everything consistently, what extent is the electoral principle of democracy achieved was positively correlated. Although it's something like how pervasive is political corruption, well, that's a bad thing. So that's negatively correlated. I mean, it really systematically works. It was stunning because I find that things don't usually work in finance. And when you do them properly, when I started in finance, I said, well, it would really be easy to produce models that would look really impressive to the boss and say, wow, this model has a great return because it's pretty easy to cheat. You have to be careful to make sure you don't kind of data mine and cheat, which is mostly what I considered my job, is to warn him about cheating more than actually produce a printing press, which I didn't. Anyway, so
what do you mean by cheating?
Well, I mean, for example, in data mining, you could say, oh, let's find the thing that's most correlated with the stock market. Oh, well, the price of cows in Liberia are really, what an incredible correlation if you look back at history. And you say, oh, I run a model, and you can make a fortune if you just, whenever the price of cows went up, you bought stocks.
I'll do that.
But it was just data mining, and you just happened to pick, you specifically searched for the thing. But there's more subtle forms of data mining, like these global portfolio models I looked at, where you pick a time scale and you say, well, let's just look how things have behaved over the last 6 months. And you backtest it, and it worked really well for a long time, and you actually made money for a while, but the parameter that is optimal changes, right? Do you look back at 6 months? Do you look back at 2 years? Or as the market speeds up, do you look back at 10 minutes? Renaissance they do little mini experiments. That much I picked up when I interviewed there. They do little mini experiments to see their effect on the market. And it's lots of real-time, data. But it's easy to cheat when you're just doing this daily time series stuff.
So why can't someone use these indicators you have, the 120 something, for if you're doing, say, slow frequency trading?
Well, they might. I mean, in fact, that's why this big financial firm is interested in us. I mean, but to do it properly, yes, you probably can, but their system is they'll be able to make money. They're guaranteed that they're going to make money because their investors are asking them for clues about socially responsible investing. So they they do all sorts of things for them. It's like a service. So that's a business model for them. That makes sense. But if your business model is, gee, we have to make a profit just on this particular thing as a trading model, that's not guaranteed to work. And that's why there's some thinking. Was that clear? Did that make sense?
Yeah, you said positive correlation. Many things could be positively correlated. It doesn't mean.
Well, many things can be positively correlated, but the fact that out of these 169 things, 168, well actually, when I just look at the things that are good or bad, let me just say, out of the 144 that were good, all of them were positively correlated. That's a pretty robust result. I mean, so I would look for robustness for models to say, well, if you vary parameters, the basic idea is sound. It's not just that you pick this one obscure indicator and, gee, it showed something nice. It's the fact that across the board, they all work is kind of stunning.
I'm just curious about the 14th bad indicator.
Although, when I presented to them, I actually said what it was when I was trying to read it here. It was something like that. It was an autocracy. There were several head of state is allowed to do blah 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 indicators that were all, they were bad things and they were negatively correlated. But one of them was a head of state was allowed to do something or another. It's a monocratic thing, and you'd think that would be bad, but it wasn't. So at least it was believable. It wasn't without exception. Spent a lot of time looking for bugs. Bugs, usually when you get a great result, it's because of a bug.
It doesn't mean the president, if the president is allowed to do whatever he wants.
Well, the head of state, whenever it's called the president or this or that, it's usually a bad thing when the head of state.
But it's not guaranteed that it's going to actually affect negatively.
Well, there's personal opinion I'll tell you about, but yeah, nothing is guaranteed in the market. So let me just close quickly talking about, so the statistical analysis, the stuff that I spent 6 months afterwards, we said, okay, let's do a statistical significance test. Nobody's done this kind of statistical significance test. I had to learn how to do that all properly. Thought about it geometrically, of course, and found that these coin flips are not all independent, but they're fairly independent. So there's less than a 1 in 1,000 chance that you would have that much consistency with the good is good rule. What's good for society is good for market. And then, so I can go through the details of that after if you're interested. And then this is also new, nobody's kind of done this kind of stuff before. I looked at positive regression. I said, well, let me combine all the indicators together and do a regression, but I want it to be positive. I mean, I'm looking at the effect that socially good is good for the market, so I wanted to do a regression of stock market returns in the future. That's the stupidest mistake people do, is just look at contemporaneous stuff, and that has nothing to do with causality. At least it has a chance if you're looking at future market returns. And so I did a positive regression. You want the coefficients to be positive, the return is good, and you see a 10% effect. Anyway, so people are heading for the door, so I'm going to end up. Sorry to go on so long. Thanks for coming. So I'm gonna end with the slide that I had before, hopefully to motivate your questioning along the line of us being shaped by our past experiences and our character and our future opportunities, and we all have the question about where we're going to go in life. For me, it's, do I want to keep thinking about this deep stuff, probably in a room alone, maybe write up some of the stuff finally, or do I make a connection, follow future obvious opportunities? I usually follow what things that drop in my lap. It's the easiest thing to do, and connect with this huge financial service provider. I still have to think about, how will I structure that? Will I still work in a room alone? In fact, I do that now most of the time, because this job is in New Jersey that we could at least solve the two-body problem. Schlumberger moved up here to Boston area, to Cambridge, and but I just telecommute to New Jersey and work in a room alone. Or do I want to work in a small team with them or whatever? So I'll just open that up for questions. Sorry to go over.
This model is going to need a little updating after the election.
What's that?
After the election, this is going to need a little updating.
Well, I mean, it's obviously a pretty crucial question,
Because how do you,
Are these
most people, like, you
autocracies-
take Rishu Sharma, let me explain what I mean by that, but you take like Why Do Nations Fail, for example. This is an economist that I think
Yeah.
Morgan Stanley, I don't know, correct me if I'm wrong, but this is a guy, usually, most of his book is phrased in terms of GDI, is usually the metric that they use in terms of whether legitimate government practices are beneficial, and they can look back, because they have numbers for that. What I don't understand here is how you go with your HDI, which I think is unique to you, or is this
Well,
a standard?
no, the HDI,
I mean,
that,
how
the
do you
HDI
go
was.
back 100 years and get quantitative information
Well,
that's
the-
reliable on all these 144 indicators that you have and know
So-
your confidence in it?
Okay, so there's two different things. The HDI is the UN Human Development Index. So they put a lot of work into creating that index.
The UN?
But yes, but it doesn't go back that far.
Okay.
But this data set, Varieties of Democracy, is different, and it goes back to 1900 and covers many countries. So they have a worldwide team working really hard putting together this data set. I'm just cherry picking and looking at the data and seeing what's saying that I could use. So there's already been all the work putting together that data. I did create a synthetic UNHDI saying, well, given all that data, I can create a UNHDI going back artificially with that data. But you're right, I mean, the basic problem in any human study, like not just finance, but science, history doesn't repeat itself exactly. So we know generally it's bad to lose a war. That's the most striking result of looking at 20th century guys. Big surprise, it's bad to lose a war. And it's dictators don't tend to lead to good things. But the time scale on which things fall apart, I personally think that it's pretty guaranteed that it's a bad thing eventually. But just like markets, bubbles can happen for a while before they fall apart. So I don't know what the time scale will be, etc. I mean, like I said, the business model of this big financial service firm, and lots of people who are getting into it, is we provide the data, you decide. And lots of people want to be able to play with the data. So just providing the data and some simple analysis on it, people will pay for that. That's a business model. But yeah, to actually do the deep research, there's no way to really know I can predict the future. Sorry. There's no way. But yeah, serious academics can make good cases like you're referring to. And that's part of my quandary about where to go is because, I've thought pretty deeply about some of the physics stuff. So, like there, I think, I really know everything that's related, and I know what the experiments are, and I can do stuff. And physics is fun because it's repeatable, and you kind of have a handle on it. And this human stuff, it's who knows? I mean, there are some money printing presses like Renaissance if you're doing at that time scale. But I never really, my caring was, when I was at IBM, I didn't really care about AI per se as a driving goal. Certainly in finance, I didn't really care about making money as a driving goal, which doesn't lead to making money because you're not looking for that killer edge you want to understand. So anyway, I'm babbling on, but
So I appreciate your candor about how when you were younger you had trouble writing up your results and you had all these interesting things and you needed someone to goad you into writing them up, and without that person you would never do it.
Yeah, or even just people to talk to on a level of detail.
So I appreciate that you have that insight now, and I'm wondering, now that in retrospect you understand that, is there any sort of mind control technique or meditation practice or pep talk you can imagine giving yourself, or if you could go back in time 20 years ago, what would you say to yourself to force in this small room where you're working alone? What would you say to yourself back then that would convince you then to
I was told this by one of my best friends, someone I roommated with. I was a roommate with 3 years in college, and he became a good, well-known doctor. And when I was tearing my hair out in grad school and as a postdoc, a professor, he said, "Well, why don't you just take a break?" I mean, that's good advice to just say, well, at IBM, I said at some point I took some time off. I actually took a leave when I was frustrated. I said part-time. They said I went part-time so I could feel I owned my own time. even though they said, well, you can just keep making the same money and do what you're doing. You don't have to take less pay. I said, no, I want less pay so I can have freedom of mind. So just to, if your goal is this superstar, really deep stuff, then you gotta relax. Basically, I just need you to relax. And I'm not a drinker, unfortunately, so and just I guess along the way I found my own quirky religion. That's part of off the deep end and stuff. And
so, what could Ed Witten have said to you that would have encouraged you to write your paper up that he didn't say?
Oh, he could have said, write that paper up. Not, you need to learn to write up in the background. That was terrible advice. You need to learn to write up, and he learned to write up in the background, but probably when he was a young guy, he probably did some work learning how to write that up. And it was harder, I think, being in mathematics, not in physics, and between the two. And it was a whole political thing going on. And so that was terrible advice. He could have just said, work on writing the simple result up. I'll think that's good. As opposed to, learn to write up in the background, and you should be doing great stuff. Don't waste your time.
So this is the last thing I'll say. Since you're interested in characters, the fact that Ed Witten's father was a physicist, do you think
Yes.
that influenced the fact that he was unable to mentor you or unable to be a good mentor in certain ways because he had always had this stuff in the background knowledge. He never needed anyone to teach him.
Well,
and maybe he was unable to teach people how to write up their results because for him it came naturally because he grew up with a physicist in the household.
I do have a model of Edward's psychology in my mind, but it doesn't go into the detail of his upbringing. And I'll just stick with the simplest stuff. He had enough plate on his plate, always doing great stuff. I mean, my model of him is he would look around the world and think about all sorts of things, and he would wait until there's this superstar idea and do it. And then sometimes looking at what other people are doing and picking off of it. He talked to a lot of people and waited to do a great idea and worked on it, and a week later there was a home run. Most of us need to percolate. So basically, to have respected that I was a young guy just starting out, and he needed time to do good work.
What he's missing is what our currently very primitive society doesn't have, and that would be a team of people. When I see somebody like this, English major, psychologists, someone undergrads in physics, undergrads in math, who would say, here's a great guy, here's stuff that comes out. He can't do this, or he doesn't have the reason, whatever it takes to do it. We're going to work like a production team, like they would in Hollywood. We don't have that concept. So just imagine, it wouldn't take that many, it might only be one, but it could be we could use as many as 3 or 4. And they surround somebody who has this difficulty, and they work with them, and they form a relationship. And they help write, they feedback stuff. A really great editor is a thing. Sometimes you need someone who psychologically understands a person, and someone who understands the subject matter well enough to at least have some discipline.
The people who can identify when someone is struggling and give advice for how to get out of that struggle are not the people who are in the position to be mentoring other students in the first place. Because the people who get to be professors are superstars all the way through.
So that's where we're missing in society.
So if you've had any struggle in your life, you don't get to be a person who can mentor students and thereby be in a position to help us.
The last person you lined up, plus they also have major ego problems.
I mean, there was one exception to that I didn't take advantage of. Like, there was a great mathematician when I was at MIT. I didn't even say where I was a professor at MIT in the math department. I guess you're in the applied math department now.
It's actually only one.
Yeah, I know, it's one big. So anyway, he was a professor, now emeritus, and he was kind of a mensch because, I mean, he kind of indicated to me he had some psychological struggles. Maybe he knew I had massive ones. And so an older professor he wasn't like caught up in the rat race. So I might have turned to talk to him, but that's also I mean, you can't expect everybody to handle everything. So I don't beat myself, well, I do beat myself up, but not when I'm rational to say, well, I just didn't have the wherewithal to find these people to talk to. There are out there some mensches, but it seems to be harder and harder because the pace speeds up and everybody's so busy trying to be great. There's no time to just kind of lend a helping hand.
You beat yourself up over whether you should beat yourself up. You meta beat yourself up, sort of.
Yeah. So you sound like you've been through it yourself. Maybe you'll get the next talk. So, any other questions? Comments? if you know I'm a good editor, you know that might.
Are you gonna publish your paper, your recent paper?
Well, it's available as a working paper. You can download this big thing, but again, it should be broken up into like academically published. It's this big opus. There's a 50-page appendix on statistical hypothesis testing and sorting all that stuff out. So I'm not sure where to publish it, but you can download it. It's available.
You're not going to tell us which countries to invest in?
Plastics. Invest in plastics. if any of you saw the classic movie, The Graduate, that's where the line from is. Invest in plastics.
All right, let's